Welcome to Des Talks, our podcast exploring creativity across Scotland. I'm Susanna Beaumont, and I look forward to sharing with you inspiring conversations with some of our most adventurous, curious and brilliant designers, artists, makers and curators. We talk ideas and inspiration, challenges and influences, the contemporary and the historic. In this episode, I'm thrilled to be exploring the life and work of the extraordinary artist Wilhelmina Barns-Graham, who was born in St Andrews, Scotland in 1912 and died at the age of 91 in 2004. And she was an explorer herself, adventuring to different countries and landscapes throughout her life, pushing her powers of observation to paint not only what she saw, but what she felt. For this conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Airey, director of the Wilhelmina Barns-Graham Trust, and the celebrated Northern Irish, Edinburgh-based filmmaker, Mark Cousins. 2 years ago, Mark made the film A Sudden Glimpse to Deeper Things, a brilliantly heartfelt and magical film about Wilhelmina, her life and work. Mark and Rob share insights into her life and the making of this remarkable film, which included the climbing in Grindelwald glacier in the Alps, which Wilhelmina did back in 1949. I very much hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello and welcome. I'm delighted to be here today at the Wilhelmina Barns-Graham Trust, just off Leith Walk in Edinburgh, and I'm here with Rob Airey, the director of the Trust, and celebrated filmmaker Mark Cousins. And we're here to talk about the work of Wilhelmina Barns-Graham, these artists born in St Andrews at the turn of the century, and her work, but in particular, we're going to focus on Mark and his film that he made 2 years ago, or was released 2 years, called A Sudden Glimpse into Deeper Things. But first, I'd like to turn to you, Rob, just to get an idea of Wilhelmina's work, her life. She was a painter, she was a printmaker, she was a photographer, she was an explorer, she was an adventurer.
She was all those things, yes. So Wilhelmina Barns-Graham, and I think from this point onwards, we'll probably refer to as Willie. Everyone called her Willie while she was alive, and that's how we always call her. And that sounds maybe a little bit familiar, but that's her familiar name. So Willie, she was born in 1912 and lived a long life. She died in 2004 at the age of 90. And she was a 20th century artist. She trained in the 30s at Edinburgh College of Art, moved to St Ives down in Cornwall in 1940, where she joined artists like Ben Nicholson and Barbara Hepworth, who'd moved there after the war. But there's also, St Ives had a long tradition of more traditional marine painters based there. So she joined up with them as well, and she kind of worked between the two initially. But as the 40s went on, she moved more towards the kind of avant-garde side of the St Ives school. And what was happening in that post-war period in St Ives was a lot of artists were sort of bridging that gap between landscape and abstraction and making landscape art with a more abstract kind of tilt, but very still inspired by landscape. And that really came to a fore for Willie in 1949 when she visited Switzerland and the Grindelwald glacier. And that's really the work she made coming out of that visit was really how she became to national prominence. She made a big body of work, which was a step change for her, much more. Her initial work in St Ives was quite traditionally landscape, but these were very different, very more abstract approach to landscape. And she showed those in London in the early 50s, and they were acquired by the Arts Council and the British Council and a lot of private collectors. And she was, for quite a brief moment, just a few years, she was quite well-known nationally as one of the leading young artists of the time, though actually she was already in her sort of late 30s.
But I think Mark has mentioned that going to Switzerland and the Alps, that it was a gear change. I mean, she went up a gear. Would you say that's what it was, a kind of point of pivot and a new way of seeing the world and exploring?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think she was, as the 40s progressed, before she went to Switzerland, her work was becoming more kind of interesting, and she was starting to look at the world in a slightly different way and represent it in a different way, rather than just painting what she saw. But certainly the experience, I think, of being on the glacier and in a completely different environment sort of tipped her in that sort of direction, a new direction.
But born in St Andrews, which is obviously on the east coast of Scotland, and then going to St Ives, which is down southern England, Cornwall, going coastal, and talks about a similar light. She was obviously drawn to edges, points of geography and geology where things happen and meet, sea meets rock, glaciers where ice meets
stone and rock. Is that something that was constant throughout her life?
Well, yes, I would say landscape was very important, but at particular moments. I mean, she lived on the beach in St Ives for 60 years, but it only sort of seeps into the work at particular moments. So really, during the 60s and 70s and really the 80s, there's very little landscape in her work, but it's almost like she's working against it. But then she would still go and draw the landscape. So it's a constant, yes, not always necessarily visible in the finished work, but I think in her brain that being physically in a particular place was important. And then there are particular moments, in the 80s she went to Orkney, and then 90s she went to Lanzarote, where it kind of comes to the fore. Italy in the mid-50s. There's these particular moments where she's kind of hit by landscape, and she makes a very particular body of work.
But she always seemed to be the photographs, and Mark will come on to your film in more detail, but when watching the film, there's lots of still photographs of her outside in Italy, looking in, I think it's Orkney, where she's looking down at the beach. She was in it,
she was immersed in it.
Yeah.
If she was taken by somewhere, she would be fully into it. And she went to Lanzarote in 1989. She was just going on holiday. And then she went for the next 4 years and went for a month each time. So she would allow herself to have time. When she went to Orkney in 1984, it was to set up an exhibition. She'd never been to Orkney, and she was immediately struck by the physical nature of the landscape, and ended up going for 6 weeks the following year.
And is she taking photographs, sketching? What is she doing to record it? I mean, I imagine her eyes, she's doing a lot of looking, but how is she recording that? Is she?
I think that changed over time. And initially, certainly in the 40s and 50s, it was about drawing in the landscape. And actually in Lanzarote as well. Orkney was more photographic, and I think that might have had something to do with the weather, but she took a lot of photographs in Orkney, particularly looking down at the horizontal slab rock beaches at Warbeth and Bercy. She was particularly taken by those specific rock forms. So she did there's 2 albums of photographs just of those beaches, rock beaches, and she definitely used those in making the work. Other times I don't think she used photographs so much to work from.
But I must say, just to mention, we've got the exhibition Earth Matters down at Inverleith House at the Botanics here in Edinburgh. And one work that is on show there is the mushroom series from number 6. And I came to see the photograph that you have. And it's painted it's a gouache from 1991. But again, that aerial view, that almost penetration of vision looking down beneath her feet. And it is an extraordinary work and quite unusual to my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes through in a lot of the landscape work, not so much in Italy, but a lot of the landscape work is about looking down. I'm sure Mark will talk maybe a bit more about that as well. But those, especially the 80s and 90s, Orkney and the mushroom series is all about looking at what's at her feet, pretty much, and then and working in different ways from it, not necessarily like the mushrooms are very much enlarged, but the Orkney reliefs are reduced as well. So, working at different scales as well. But I think the photograph is a aid memoir rather than just painting what's in the photograph.
Because there's in the gouache, it's amplified. So that sense of scrutiny, a beautiful scrutiny. So maybe, Mark, we should bring you in here. You're based in Edinburgh, and we're just probably several bus stops away from where you lived, from where we are now speaking, because you first encountered Willie's work, I think, in the late 1980s.
That's right.
So so this has been quite a journey for you of how you first met her work, and then through the making of your film and working with the Trust have explored her work and her diaries and her notebook. So just say a little bit about that kind of journey.
Yeah, I first saw her work in 1989, Susanna, in the City Arts Centre here in Edinburgh. And it was like being struck by lightning in a way, when you see something outside yourself that is like really familiar and really intense. And I think as Rob was talking there, I was thinking, that when she went to the glacier in Switzerland, she saw something outside herself that was really familiar and really intense. And I just really felt that I saw somebody who was searching for form. And that's what excited me. At that stage, I didn't know she was interested in mathematics. I didn't know much about her. I was just like your sensorium, your nervous system has a reaction to something.
And at this point, you were a young filmmaker. You just kind of left you at the Stirling studying film and art history. So,
right.
So this was quite, for you, where the visual image was hugely important. Yeah. This was quite a moment at a young age.
I think so. And I think, I realized quite young that I was a visual thinker rather than a verbal person, even though I'm using words now. I'm sort of translating in my head before these words come out of my mouth, and so visual stuff I got almost immediately. Maths and physics were easy for me, but English was really hard, so it's almost like having a gaydar or something, you notice somebody else who's on the same frequency as you, and that's what I felt about Willie. I thought, oh my goodness, she's way ahead of me, but that's where I want to get to, that search for form, Rob, you know what I mean? Like the search for form. And I think what the search for form is, it isn't only, a sort of theoretical thing, as we know, Susanna. The search for form is, I remember thinking, Willie is not an impressionist. She's not trying to capture the fleeting moment, the light, for example, like that. She's looking for something eternal, almost, the underlying structures of nature, just like Paul Cézanne was looking for them and other great artists who I love. And I was struck, or I was, as I proceeded to understand her work, I thought she's looking for something eternal almost, and we know there's a spiritual dimension to her work, but she's looking for more than the everyday moment. I think, that's why she's interested in geology and ancient time, and glaciers are very old things, even though they click and crack and are translucent. They're ancient in a way. And I think Willie was looking for something profound and timeless. And that's very moving, especially as you get older.
So that's how many years? 30, 40 years ago now. Yeah. And so when did this realization that you became a filmmaker, that you would make a film? Because also it seems to me this was quite an immediate, intimate affinity you felt with her work. What decision did you decide to go kind of public in a way to make a film, to declare this fascination and absolute intrigue and delight in her work, but also a sense of like-mindedness? When did you decide, actually, I'm going to share my skills and celebrate her through this very singular documentary? There's no words that I would happily describe it, which is a compliment, because it is, because you weave your own life in to the story you're telling about her life. So when did you decide, okay, I'm going to make a film?
Well, that was thanks to Rob and his colleagues here, Cassia, etc. You take something inside yourself, whether it's, like I've got tattoos, as you can see, in my arms, and I've got Virginia Woolf in my arms, and I've got a great Ukrainian filmmaker, Kira Muratova, and I've got something here from Barns-Graham. So you just sort of take them inside yourself and they sit there for a long time. But then when COVID came, my partner and I went up to visit St Andrews to see where Willie lived and where, her big fancy house and all that sort of stuff, And I tweeted on social media about that. And that's when the Trust, Rob and his colleagues, messaged me and said, oh, would you like to come and have a look? So I came here where we're sitting now, and that's where it really went up a gear. I was overwhelmed by the fact that there was so much stuff here. I felt I was sitting inside her brain in some way. And as you know, the film that I eventually made is sort of about her brain. And so that's where I thought, okay, I felt compelled to do
Rob,
something.
Maybe we should say that we're sitting here in the Trust office, and we are in the archive room with her journals from the 60s and 70s. We've got a wonderful array of cookbooks behind me because she was a keen cook. So I absolutely get, she kept these things and books, and there's books on geology, there's books on Jura, there's books on other artists, Terry Frost I'm looking at, Giacometti. So it's obviously a curious mind, as you would expect from an artist. But when did the Trust set up, and when did you come here? Because you were in St Andrews, and then fairly recently you moved to Edinburgh.
Yeah, so Willie had actually legally created the Trust as an entity in the late 80s, in 1987, when she was 75, as a body that would look after her legacy after she died. But not knowing how long she might live, she actually lived for another nearly 17 years, and actually during that time found her own success, because when one of the impetuses behind setting up the Trust was that she felt she hadn't had the success she felt, and she thought, the trust would be needed to do that for her. So it only really started being active after she died in 2004. And at that point, the trust was based at her house in Fife, outside St Andrews. And the trust was based there till 2014. But it's a big house, not even in St Andrews, like a few miles outside St Andrews, quite hard to get to. So for curators and researchers, anyone who wanted to visit, quite hard to get to. So the trust decided at that point to move into Edinburgh, so it was much more accessible to people, but they didn't have any staff at that point. So I was employed in 2017 when we moved into the building we're in now, which is an old ambulance station, actually. Mm-hmm. And then the art was moved here gradually, in the archive and the library, and we've been here just over 8 years. The Trust has got two main functions, really, to look after Willie's legacies and artists and the collections, but we're also a charity. So we support artists through bursaries at art colleges and residences as well. So this is one of the things she specified. So we try and support the new generation of artists through her legacy as well.
And you welcome filmmakers.
Absolutely, yes.
And I suppose it's a big job to say, fair enough, isn't it, Rob? Because she made so much art, first of all, and she kept so much stuff. Yeah. It's not like a sort of svelte, minimal archive. There's
There's a lot of work. She's someone, her personality, I think, was to keep things...
Is she like Muriel Spark? Or was like Muriel Spark, who I've been doing some research on her archive where she kept every receipt. So,
she did, I would say, and I don't think she destroyed much of her work. So, I mean, it's an amazing resource because people might know the published finished paintings, but we've got all the little doodles and scraps of paper, which, were part of the development of each body of work. So it's very useful in sort of joining the dots between different phases of her art. So, it's a really rich resource, and having the letters and diaries as well means it's, we can build an amazing kind of overview of her sort of life and her work and how they kind of mesh together.
And
which
Mark,
is quite complicated.
That's what you found. You felt you were kind of entering her head. And
those notebooks were incredible, Susanna. Like Rob would show me like a little jotter, as we would call it, and with thin paper, and every page would be a detailed colour study of something, page
because
after
maybe you
page
should talk a
after
little
page.
bit about her synesthesia and what that is, because again, you talk about when you first encountered her work, but there was a kind of frisson of excitement knowing there's somebody that you could understand or you wanted to unravel, and she had this mind where she associated colour with a particular personal place. And I've got one jotted down that the O was the colour of ping pong, E was like Prussian blue. Tell me more about how that led you into thinking more about her life and times and her work.
Well, we're in the era of neuroscience now, aren't we? And I would say neuro art history now. So we're looking back at art history with more insights into how the mind works. And what we know about synesthesia is it's extra neural pathways, pathways that most of us don't have. And she clearly did. So colour is connected to words, for example. And that is extra exciting. And all through, the history of the creative world, people have taken hallucinogenic drugs in order to create temporary pathways. And so we know so many of the great writers had temporary experiences of synesthesia or other things, but Willie had them permanently, as it were, right, Rob, we've got documents from quite early on in her life, is that right?
I think she was aware of it from quite young, but definitely by the 30s, it was something that she had put a name to. And it's quite hard for us without it to understand quite how it manifests itself and how people with it experience it. And I think it's different for everyone. But she was certainly very aware that she had a heightened sense of colour compared to other people.
But what I must say about the opening of the film, A Sudden Glimpse into Deeper Things, that you start with a kind of overture of music and images. Yeah. We get a shot of Edinburgh, the Forth Rail Bridge, we get landscape, close-ups of her paintwork, and then we get photographs of her. And your gentle provocation, but assertive provocation, that who is this outdoorsy, sensible woman? Here is her in her later years, doughty, grey-haired woman. And you tease the audience from the start, or invite us to kind of engage with our ways of seeing, our conceptions, misconceptions. When did you decide to do that? Because here, as we've been talking about, this extraordinary mind and brain, but appearances deceive.
Exactly. It starts with a kind of ageism theme, like this, older looking lady with sensible shoes. How could she, what prejudice do we have? Of what do we see when we see an old lady wearing one of these kind of green coats and that's where I wanted to start outside herself, start with us and perhaps our prejudices about older women in particular, and then say yet and yet and yet. And I start with one example where she made unusual connections between socks and elephants and rocks.
Which I love.
Thank you.
I so love that, because again, you're in this film and already you're spoiling us visually, because these images come in quick succession. There's a real rhythm. And I love the kind of beat of the film. And then we get her words is narrated by Tilda Swinton. We get, unusual to see elephants in St Ives, and then socks, rocks, colour of socks, elephant, and this wonderful, and you immediately feel kind of invited into her thinking and into her mind.
This is creativity. This is what creative people do. They make unusual leaps. Arthur Koestler talks about by association, where you can associate two things that would never have been associated before. She, in this little moment, socks, elephants, rocks, connected three things that probably have never been connected before. And that's you could say again, and if you want to be mechanical about it, this is neuropathways, but it doesn't in a way matter. It means that she's exciting to look at and it's exciting to be in her mind.
And that must have been a challenge, but as a filmmaker that has made, and this is your first film about a visual artist.
I made one about Ian Hamilton Finlay, but for BBC TV, so the first feature-length film about a visual artist.
And you've done Orson Welles again, which I think that you've mentioned that he's always about looking up, and whereas this is about somebody looking down between the ground beneath their feet. But as much as you always are taken with your subject matter, I feel that because of this affinity, you must have felt even more charged, the way a duty to explain the complexities and the richnesses of her work and her mind. Did you feel that?
Yes, some of them, obviously, you can't deal with everything, but I felt, I relished the thought, that she was, a posh woman, and I'm come from a very working class background. So, in terms of conventional wisdom, it should be harder for me to get into her head, but it was super easy, I think,
But what you do, because I would say that you take, what was the word, and maybe not risk, you split screen, you animation, you get the sound of the paintbrush, you get the texture, you're kind of doing the drawing with her on the thing, and you have colour blocks, and then you have text running across, and say you have the voice of the narrator, we have your voice, we have Linda Buckley's score. There's so much richness weaving in, so your palette is huge, but you don't override her.
Well, thank you. That's nice. I mean, she's a multiverse. It's like Leaves of Grass, that poem. She is a multiverse, and that's what's exciting about her. No matter, you can say a lot about Willie. I'm looking at Rob here. You can say a lot about Willie and still not have said enough in a way, So I wanted to be respectful and try to see how she saw the world, but also acknowledge that I'm in this conversation, and some filmmakers try to be objective. There used to be a BBC style in the 60s. Usually I have to say middle-class men making these films where they wouldn't declare their own interest, their own subjectivity. And I needed to, I needed to say that, she was infected by something like the glaciers and the geology of the world and the mathematics of the world. And I was infected by her. And I think it's more honest to say that to the audience. This is coming from a personal sphere in some way.
But that's what I found so, and I think lots of viewers that I've spoken to feel there's a warmth and welcome because you do weave in the personal. And there's one point where there's a photograph of you sitting on a beach and again, kind of this looking and, beach and obviously St Ives, St Andrews. So I kind of loved that way that you talk about your own anxieties, and also then you and Rob go to Grindelwald and you talk about your fear of heights and anxiety.
He was prancing along. You were a little scared, but
I was scared before, but I was nervous before we went because unlike I think Mark or the film's producers, Adam and Mary, I'd looked into the route and what was going to be involved, and I think I had more of a sense of what was ahead.
And did you have your Kendall mint cake with you in a flask?
No, I didn't. But I was
didn't warn me. Noticed.
But I was nervous.
I would have had a few quick cognacs before I went up there. It was absolutely terrifying.
Why? Because you talk about going with your father up the Eiffel Tower when you were young, or this fear that you're stepping at the crunch of the ice. What was it, or amalgamation of it all?
It was a very rational fear, I would say, because the ledge that we were walking on was about 30 centimetres wide at times, and the drop was hundreds and hundreds of meters.
Well, I think that's fair enough.
So I think that was actually quite sensible. Plus, we were carrying film equipment, 2 tripods or 3 tripods, lenses, cameras, etc. So I think people like Rob, who took it easy, I think I'm the normal person and he's the weirdo.
No, well, I was carrying. I think I had some sort of load.
Yeah,
I think I had a camera.
You did.
I had a camera.
Yeah,
when I was up there, I just got into. I think I got into the adventure of it, and I wasn't too worried. Most of the time there was something to hold on to, so I didn't have the inherent vertigo, which I think you and Adam both had. Yes. I mean, I was okay. I was a bit, slightly nervous, but I wasn't, not the terror.
But what was interesting, Susanna, is, we climbed up and up and up and up and up. And then because of the geology of these things, then you peak and you go down into what we would call in Scotland the corrie, so the glacial space. And you feel as if you're in a bowl and you're surrounded by hillside. Do you remember that incredible feeling? You know? And it was warm up there. I remember I was only in a vest. It was warm. And the anxiety and the adrenaline, it totally left my body, and we did loads of shots in a short amount of time. Like we covered, I think we did at least 200 shots in quite a short amount of time.
And it's very different when Willie was there, but just being on a glacier surrounded by ice is an extraordinary experience.
It's incredibly moving, isn't it?
I think it was very different to how Willie experienced it. Very different.
She had it easy compared to us because the glacier was down near the village.
And she wasn't carrying a tripod.
Yeah, and she wasn't carrying a tripod. But it is incredibly moving, isn't it? Because you're standing on a translucent thing, an ancient thing. You feel as if you're standing on the back of a whale or something. It's remarkable. Have you ever?
No.
Please do sometime. Iceland or anywhere. It's unbelievable.
But Willie went there in 49 with some friends and a couple of their young
family,
sons.
that she'd met.
And again, I think she does talk when I think she's writing home to her family and saying, well, I don't know what there is here. And then clearly once she walked up the glacier, and that sense, as you've both talked about, incredibly moved. And again, this way of seeing, and I can imagine that you're looking at things are refracted, light is reflected. That must have just fired her thinking and her eyes. Do you think
she found something she was looking for? Sometimes you don't know that you're looking for something until you find it, and then you think, my God, of course. And I think lots of us have experiences like that where you come to a place and you think, my goodness, this is in some way, I had pre-imagined this. And then certainly when she got there, the impact is obviously like what we call an epiphany. James Joyce talks about this, etc. So it certainly fired her, but it's almost like, I don't know, Rob, you know much better than me, but it's almost like St Ives had done what it could do for her visually. Yeah. And she needed something else.
Like pulling at the leash, almost like by 1948, the work she was doing in St Ives was very different to the work she did initially there. But she'd been living in St Ives for 8 or 9 years, through the war, so she couldn't travel so much. So it was almost like a release and a tipping point at the same time. She got away from St Ives and gone somewhere absolutely extraordinary at the same time, and it was those two things.
But also, what she does, these aren't monumental images of glaciers. There's an intimacy to them. She's looking at them. It's about the light. It is about the refraction. It's about trying to penetrate through and how it's a way of seeing rather than a dutiful record. They're not romanticized. This is her scrutiny.
She mentioned her disappointment that she wrote to her parents because Grindelwald itself is an amazing place surrounded by the Eiger and amazing alpine peaks. I mean, it's stunningly beautiful, amazing place. But that clearly didn't interest her. She could have painted the mountains, but she didn't even draw the mountainscape, which is the obvious thing.
But once she started, was able to feel comfortable looking down.
Yeah.
That idea of the sublime was already very, very prevalent, obviously, in Romantic art. And so the sublime, you had to capture the majesty, the scale. But she's not, I don't know, Rob, what you would think, but I don't think the sublime is really an issue for her.
She's not interested.
I agree.
No,
Not interested.
Yeah.
She's more interested in structural matter and questing form, and obviously colour and layers and scratching of the surfaces as we see in all those glacier pictures. But it's something, as I mentioned earlier, something less about the rush of the heart and more about a kind of underlying
it's the
eternity
nature, it's
of,
the essence of something.
Yeah.
I think it's that sense of essence. How can you take and give an essence? Because I always think of Nan Shepherd, the Living Mountain, as well. And again, a very similar a Scottish writer of the early 20th century whose Living Mountain very much talks about not wanting to claim or conquer. And there's a kind of very kind of male language, but observe, look, be a companion to the mountain. And that's what I feel that Willie does.
This is the first time she talked specifically about sort of trying to paint or depict the experience rather than, the pure visual reality, seeing things from all sides. It's almost got that sort of cubist idea of trying to depict on a flat surface the essence or the experience of being somewhere rather than just how it looks.
I think that's an important point about Cubism, isn't it, Rob? Because Cubism was not about the sublime. A jug, a table, anything was interest to the Cubists. It was more about how you saw it from all the multiple angles. And I think that's what she took as well, that sense that what's right beneath my feet is universal in some way.
And then maybe Mark as a filmmaker, because I always think that Cubism came in with the rise of the moving image and more kind of films coming out in the kind of early 20th century, and that cult of the new, understandably. And for many artists to think, why are we trying to kind of just reproduce how we, from 3D to 2D, that record, we don't need to do this. We've got to think differently. We've got to come up with something new, which is looking at a glass at a different way and breaking up a surface. So I always think that sense of when film came, it rallied the artists to think differently about how they paint. And I think that's kind of Cubism very much came out of that. But what I like, Mark, is that you have all these paintings weaving together the text and the voice, your voice and the narrator's voice, you bringing all these together. So how did you feel about you? It is a documentary, but it is weaving, as I said, your life and her life. How did you approach the work? And were there any rules and regs about how you should reproduce the work? We'd see in the film you photographing during COVID, you're photographing lots of her works throughout the country, the glacier works. Did you feel that you had to, how did you work with these works? The artist is no longer alive. How did you not tiptoe, but how did you approach that? Because that's quite a challenge, I would say.
Yeah, Rob was crucial to it, and the fact that one of the things that I took to about Rob immediately, he didn't talk an abstract language about Willie. It was actually quite practical language that he was using, and I really understood that language, and dare I say, like some people in the art world talk a rather theoretical way, which I don't fully understand. In terms of the practical stuff, we knew that we wanted to photograph really high resolution, so we used 8K cameras and 6K cameras. And for people listening, if you usually go to an everyday cinema, you'll see 4K, so it's higher than cinema resolution. And then that allowed us to get close to bits of the paintings. But a lot of them, we just tried to use full frame, didn't we? Not crop them at all, Rob, isn't that right? But occasionally we needed to get really close. But where possible, we just presented the full image. Now, remember, as you mentioned, that Willie's pictures are not huge, many of them. So to see this on a big screen, the magnification is enormous. We're seeing these pictures, unbelievably, something like 100,000 times bigger than they are in real life if you see it on a big screen. And that's a unique property of cinema, that it can show small things in a huge way. The face of Greta Garbo, a tear of Elizabeth Taylor. Cinema can really let us inspect something in detail. And we've seen this film on some very big screens. And it's great, I have to say, to see the pictures that big, isn't it?
Particularly the surfaces of the glacier pictures, they're very heavily worked, and you can see the brush marks, and she's scratched and scraped at them. And we're very used to seeing things on computer screens, JPEGs on computer screens and in books, and everything gets flattened out and you lose all that nuance. But this high resolution, that when the details got shown, it was incredible to see them that big. And there's, they do relate to the actual place of Grindelwald, because the rocks get scratched and scraped. So there was, the surface of the paintings almost felt like some of the surfaces we saw when we were up on the glacier, particularly the rocks.
But that's what I think does come across the film when I've seen it on a cinema screen, and also I have watched it on my laptop. So it's a very, obviously very, but you get, it's a very textural film. And I think that's what is important, that richness of the brushstroke. But we should say in 2022, you made at the Fruit Market Gallery here in Edinburgh, Like a Huge Scotland, which was an installation in their warehouse space. How did that fit into the film? And that was a physical encounter rather than just a cinema screen.
So it was 4 screens rather than 1, and a complicated sound design, lots of scratchy things and stuff like that. And the idea behind that is I knew I was making this documentary film, which had to cover quite a lot of Willie's life and work. But in conversation with Rob and his colleagues, I wondered what the older Willie, because she lived a long time, would think of remembering back to those days in 1949, So it's a sort of memory piece in a way, and I'm very interested in the aging process, and I've just turned 60, so that's a moment in your life, and so I really tried to ask myself, what would she feel like? The older lady who had seen more and painted more, what would she think of this younger woman who was excited and exhilarated by this day or two in her life?
But that's what I like, and it's the older Willie is saying to the younger, "You're happier than me," and then the older woman says, "I'm a better painter."
Yes,
and I love it because I
both
think
are true.
Yeah, exactly, and that probably encapsulates how the age you think, well, actually, I might have lost my looks, but I'm wiser.
There are losses and gains in getting older.
Exactly.
And I think Willie was a better and better looker, and I think probably again, I don't know. Unfortunately, I never met her, but I think there are sadnesses, let's say, of getting older. And so she felt all that. And so I was really interested in that looking back, but to use these images really, really large, as if she was seeing the glaciers as if they're fresh in her mind, because there are things that I did last week I can't remember, but there are moments in my life from way back that I remember with crystal clarity, and I suspect she was like that as well.
And were you aware when you decided to make this film that it's very much about you at a certain age in your life, that you could not have made it 20 years ago?
Yeah, it would have been a different film. It would have been less elegiac. I wouldn't probably have started with an older person, like the older Willie, and then the ending of, I think it would have been less elegiac.
Because it's beautifully, as I said, the older and the younger. And Rob, for you, how it's been shown around the world, it's won awards, must have brought a lot of people to her work. How has that been for you from that email from Mark, I suppose about 6 years ago now?
Gosh, yeah, it seems, it's been an amazing journey. Well, it's just, it's amazing. It is amazing that so many people have been introduced, but thousands more people have been introduced to Willie as an artist through Mark's film. So, on that basic level, things the Trust aims to do is to have more people know and understand her work. So to have, global, Willie's never really had a global audience. She's kind of well known in the UK, but beyond the UK, not that well known at all. So to have the film shown around the world at festivals means,
And because it's such I keep on saying this, and I think you can watch it on the BFI website, British Film Institute, but it is an artwork. And I use that advisedly because I don't know if that's a compliment or how I'm wanting to say it, but because you tickle at convention, and I think that's what makes it so, because you're in partnership with her, and I think that's important with her. And
I think we wouldn't, the Trust, I wouldn't have been interested in working on a sort of bog standard sort of documentary, and it was important that Mark was bringing a creative approach to it, and working on Like a Huge Scotland as well, that it was, that's an art work in itself. So I think to bring a creative response to Willie was important.
Absolutely vital.
Yeah.
I know that there's an exhibition of Willie's work this autumn at St Ives. So what is that? Is that going to be the glacier work?
There's 2 big exhibitions this year. Before the Tate in June. There's a big show in the Netherlands, which is the first time Willie's been shown in any depth outside the UK. So that's a career-spanning exhibition of about 60 works. And then in October, there's a much bigger show at Tate St Ives, which again will be career-wide from the 30s to the noughties. So 7 decades of work, but just picking out particular moments. There's probably, I think there's about over 100 works, but again, that's whenever you do a show of Willie's, you're always just scratching the surface, really. They're showing the classes in depth, but then it'll go, there'll be a room at the end of the work from the last 10 years.
And I say here in Scotland, we're showing 2 works. We're showing September, Orkney, a landscape by Willie, and the wonderful Tentsmere mushroom at Inverleith House as part of Earth Matters. And Mark, how has it been for you to make this, as I say, extraordinarily intimate, beautiful film that is your life as well? How has it been?
It was fab. My previous film was about Mussolini. So that was not a lot of fun. So to be in this creative space for a long time and working with Rob and his colleagues was just great. And I felt energized by the whole process.
And any new projects, new artists?
Unfortunately, yes. So I've got a 16-hour film coming out at the moment. It premiered in Sundance Film Festival and then Berlinale. And it next comes to, shall we say, a quite well-known festival on the Riviera in France.
Ooh.
Which we're not naming. So that's rolling out across this year, and it's called The Story of Documentary Film, and it's a creative look at the history of documentary cinema and the poetics of documentary.
And I should say, because here on the desk is your book, which is a brilliant book about your delight in looking. And I would say to anybody that's listening that wants to kind of find out more about Mark and his thinking and looking and sense of kind of investigation into the visual, it's a really brilliant book. And also, we haven't mentioned, if people want to know what they should take a look at, is Darcy Wentworth Thompson, an early 20th century, or he's born late 19th century, on growth and form. And perhaps, Mark, you can just say how important this was to Willie, that she met him, because he was a tutor of maths and science at Dundee and St Andrews. And I think Willie met him. And this has been
when she was a child.
Yeah, and a key work for many artists, I think, to look at form.
Again, looking at the underlying, he looks at the shape of a fish, or he looks at the shape of lots of natural elements, and you can see, you can see there's almost like a Leonardo da Vinci quality, a kind of X-raying of form and seeing what's the skeletal matter here.
Brilliant.
Yeah, structure in nature. That was definitely an important thing for Willie, which comes out in the Darcy Wentworth Thompson book.
And now my new thing, I haven't said this, is anything you wish you had said that haven't said, just like in our time. If there's anything you feel that you wanted to say a little, sometimes you think, damn it, why didn't I mention that?
I should have mentioned about the revised version of Lynn Green's book, Studio Life, which will come out in June. It's the 25th anniversary of this book. For a long time, there was only ever one book written about Willie, which is written, it came out 25 years ago. So we've revised that with all new digital photography. So the colours and reproductions are going to be much nicer. So that's out in June.
And of course, Lynn is mentioned in the film. And of course, she says how beguiling Willie was, because she met her on a number of occasions, and how she would have flirted with Mark, didn't she? She does say that she was a flirt.
I would have flirted right back.
Yeah, I know.
Willie liked walking. I like walking. She liked sherry. I like sherry. What's not to love?
Yeah. Anything you feel that you would have liked to say other than flirting?
No, I don't think so. I think we cover. I mean, the sense of the personality. She was quite a personality, Rob. I think, wasn't she? She liked parties. She was quite a character. And I think, of course, she was famously very beautiful. And so she had I think, quite an inventive romantic life, for example, So she really lived, this woman.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to Mark and Rob for sharing so generously your thoughts on Willie's work and life and the making of a film. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting us here at the Trust.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening. A Sudden Glimpse to Deeper Things is available to download for a small fee from British Film Institute. You can see 2 outstanding works by Willie in Earth Matters, A Celebration of Soil, and the geologist James Hutton, which runs at Inverleith House, Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, to the 1st of November. It's curated by me, Susanna, in partnership with the Botanics. For further information about upcoming exhibitions on Wilhelmina Barns-Graham, please look at our description. Thanks again for listening. Please do share the word, subscribe and rate and rave. We really want to reach as many people as possible with these conversations. And don't forget to explore previous podcasts such as Viv Lee and Jonathan Wade talking clay and the making of Earth Becoming for Earth Matters, and our conversation about Donald Locke, the Guyanese artist who studied at Edinburgh College of Art in the 1960s, whose solo show is currently on at Camden Arts Centre in London. Huge thanks, as ever, to musician Malin Lewis for Cycle Lane, which accompanies this podcast, and to Ryan Scott Media for production.